Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to show you how I painted these Crusaders. These are the plastic 15mm scale, or if you prefer, 100th scale Crusaders from Battlefront. More specifically, they're from the Flames of War Crusader anti-air troop box, which came with the anti-air turret, obviously, and regular Crusader turrets, and so I decided these tanks would just be Crusaders with the regular turret, and the AA turret will just be an option if I ever play a game and want the AA option. I built this kit way back in 2021. Remember 2021? Way back then? It is a simple kit to put together, but if you'd like to see how it's done, there's a build video linked in the description below. Okay, time to put some paint on plastic. I started by priming the models black, then I base coated them with Vallejo model color brown sand. The colour in these shots, unless I've managed some editing magic, isn't quite an accurate representation. It's not very well lit. But this colour is kind of dark, a bit darker than the sandy colour we want, but that is on purpose. I felt like it was a good idea to do a darker colour before applying the lighter colours that follow, which means having to do fewer coats. I could have just not used a black primer, but that's all I had, so that's what I used. I then applied Vallejo model color dark sand, which is a bit lighter but it's still kind of dark. It is called dark sand after all. I'm obviously spraying this all over the model, and it does cover almost all of the previous colour, but it isn't a perfect solid coverage, which is on purpose. There's a little bit of the brown sand in some of the recesses and lower areas, which makes for some very slight colour variation, which is what I wanted. I follow this by lightly airbrushing on a mix of roughly 3 parts model colour dark sand to 1 part model colour buff. This is a rough mix, and I don't really do precise mixes, I just put the colours together until I find something I like. I mostly spray this onto the model from above, though I do also spray it on the sides a bit. The idea here is that since I'm not depicting the light coming from any particular direction, just roughly overhead, this layer should lighten the upper surfaces of the model to represent overhead sunlight and maybe a little bit of paint fading. It's not a stark difference, but you can see on the right that it is different. Time for camo. I wanted a hard edge camo pattern for this, so I'm using a brush to apply the old Flames of War Russian Green from Vallejo. Using a brush for this is quicker and less of a hassle than it would be to mask and use an airbrush. When trying to decide which colours I wanted to use, I happened upon a guide that said to use Flames of War Firefly Green, and I liked that colour. Apparently it's equivalent to Vallejo 894, which I have as the old Flames of War bottled Russian Green. It also seems to be listed as Camouflage Olive Green, which I don't have, so I used what I did have. I'm not trying to replicate anything specific with this camo pattern, I'm just doing something similar to a few examples I saw that I thought looked interesting. I'm taking my time to do some nice smooth edges, and I'm trying to avoid any jagged shapes. When it came time to put the camo on the turrets, I took them off their painting sticks, and then I used the paint to mark where the camo pattern on the hull would meet the turret. I feel like this is better than just guessing, but if you did want to just guess, you could do that too. I don't care, I'm not going to stop you. This does obviously mean that your turrets will now belong to specific hulls, unless you've painted your hulls identically, I guess. Once I know where the camo should start, it's a simple matter of putting the turrets back on their popsicle sticks and painting in the rest of the green. I didn't really go into this with a plan for the pattern. As I said, I'm just doing what I think looks interesting. I'm sure there's some sort of regulations for the way camo patterns should be applied and in what proportions and such, and I'm sure it's a massive crime to be disregarding that, but I am disregarding it. Oh, such rebellion! I'm pretty happy with the camo pattern itself here, though the green colour is a bit darker than I really wanted. I did consider doing a green highlighting over this, but it seemed a bit more annoying than it was worth, so I applied a dry brushing with model colour Ivory. I do this all over the model, and I'm trying to not go too heavily. Unsurprisingly, it does look a lot heavier over the green, while it's barely noticeable over the sand colour. You don't need to be a rocket biologist to figure out why that is. This works to bring out the raised edges and corners and rivet detail and things like that, which does kind of defeat the purpose of camo a bit, but this is a model, and doing this allows us to see the detail a bit better. It also has the added bonus of lightening the green colour a bit, making it look a bit worn and faded. This is why I didn't bother with a green highlight. This is much easier, and I got the result I wanted. Can't argue with that. Decals come next. This kit didn't include any decals. Fortunately, I've been building models for quite a while, so I've built up a good collection of decals over the years. I've used some decals from Battlefront and some from the Plastic Soldier Company, and as with the camo scheme, I'm not aiming to replicate anything specific here, I just want something that reads at a glance as, "Oh look, a British tank." I don't know, or care, if the Desert Rats had Crusaders with the number 51 in a red square. For the turrets I chose the red markings, mostly because they go faster. The regular Crusaders got a square, which I believe indicates B Squadron, and the anti-air turrets got a triangle, which, as I understand it, represents the A Squadron. Is this historically accurate? Probably not, but I don't care, and it looks reasonable enough to me.
Historical accuracy police, open up!
Once the decals are on, it's time for a bit of chipping. For this I'm using Ammo by Mig chipping colour and a piece of artist's sponge. You could also do this with a bit of packaging foam like you might find in a modelling package, like a Flames of War blister, or any other similar type of spongy foam. This is done the same way that I usually do it, in an up and down dabbing motion like the kids are always talking about. This is a very simple technique, but it's also really easy to go overboard, especially on a small model like this one. It can be hard to get the sponge into the smaller areas without totally covering the surrounding parts, so I add some extra spots of chipping in those areas with a fine brush. This can also be used to make some scratches. This isn't difficult, though you should be careful doing this on such a small model. You don't want your scratch to end up looking like a brush stroke. You've just got to use a fine brush that doesn't have too much paint on it and barely any pressure at all. If you want to do this and you're not quite sure, it's probably worth practicing on a piece of scrap or something first. Now for the tracks. I'm using Ammo by Mig rust tracks here because I want rusty tracks, and this is a good way to get them. Applying this is simple enough, you just brush it onto the tracks, and don't brush it onto the parts that are not tracks. If you get this on not tracks, definitely panic, it's the end of the world. By which I mean you can always tidy it up later, or even blend it into the paintwork as a dirty stain. I use a bigger brush for the larger areas of the tracks, and then I come back with a smaller brush to get into the tighter areas, like where the tracks are very close to the sides of the hull, and in between the teeth on the drive sprocket. Crusaders had rubber tyres, so I paint those with rubber and tyres from Ammo by Mig. Seems appropriate enough. Again, I'm using a slightly larger brush around the main areas of the wheel, where there's little risk of getting this colour on anything else. Then I come back with a smaller brush and get the rest. You can always correct mistakes, but doing this is a good way to avoid them and save yourself a little bit of time. The idler wheel should have a rubber tyre too, but there's nothing moulded onto the model to show where that starts and the metal ends, so for the idlers I just painted the outer surface. When this is on the gaming table, you aren't going to be able to see that there isn't a defined rubber tyre there, so I don't think it matters too much. Speaking of defined, I use Vallejo model colour Ivory to touch up the wheel rims, or at least the parts of the rims that should be the lighter colour. This is pretty simple, I just use the edge of the brush and run it along the raised rim of the wheel. Doing that makes it very easy to put the colour exactly where you want it. It is still a good idea to be careful and patient with this though, because rushing is the best way to make mistakes, and then you've got to spend time fixing those mistakes. For the wheels with the green paint, I used model colour Pastel Green. This is a lot brighter than the green camouflage, obviously, which makes them really stand out. Both of these wheel rim highlights do stand out a bit more than I really wanted them to, but it's not the worst thing in the world. I mean, the idea is for them to stand out a bit and create some depth, and they are doing that. This following step does take care of that a little bit. I applied some army painted dark tone to the tracks, rubber tyres, wheels, and the lower hull sides. This is mixed roughly 3 parts dark tone to 1 part water, and I more or less just slop it onto the lower areas of the tank. I am trying not to apply it too heavily, and with this sort of thing you should try not to let it pool up too heavily anywhere, and once it's dry it should darken things down a bit nicely. It also adds a sort of dirty effect. It seemed like a fun idea to put some of this into the open part of the anti-air turrets as well. I figured that would add some depth, and hopefully make it look like it's actually an open turret and there isn't just a floor in there for the figure to sit on. I follow this by painting the tools. And by tools I mean the shovel on the back of the turrets. I used model colour Cork Brown for the handles, which I figured would look nice. It doesn't really stand out from the light colour too much, but it does contrast really nicely with the green. Then I paint the diggy bit of the shovel with scale 75 black metal. Both parts of the shovel are fairly small and flat, which does make sense, but it does also mean you should be careful when painting them to avoid getting colours in places you don't want them. Probably stating the obvious, isn't it? I almost forgot about the coaxial machine guns. I also used the scale 75 black metal to paint these. I forgot to video it because I'm very good at what I do, but once the metallic colour had dried, I applied some undiluted army painted dark tone to those parts, just to darken them down a bit. I follow this by applying a wash of army painter light tone over everything. I thinned this roughly 50-50 with water. I've applied it fairly heavily. I do, of course, try to avoid letting it pool up too much in any one place, though it does naturally tend to get a little bit heavier in corners and gaps and things like that. That's okay though, that's what we want. It adds some depth there, while also kind of making things look a bit dirtier. The final step is to apply a coat of matte varnish. The model did actually look fairly matte after the wash was applied, but now it looks ultra matte. Also, spraying the matte varnish just makes it look more consistent. So that's how I painted the 15mm scale Flames of War Crusader tanks from Battlefront. I think the results I've got here are fairly decent. You can tell they're Crusaders, though I guess that is largely because of the way the models are shaped, not so much my painting. But they do look very Crusader-y. They look like they've seen some fairly harsh conditions, and haven't really been cleaned recently, though I don't think the dirtiness looks over the top. I do, however, think I went a little bit too far with the chipping. Sometimes you just get excited and can't help yourself. I think these are the first British tanks I've painted for Flames of War, and they won't be the last. I've just received the new Comet Armoured Squadron box, so if you're into that kind of thing, stick around.
So you'll be painting those immediately, Herbert?
Probably not, but maybe sooner than later. When I do paint them though, I think I'll do it a little bit differently. This paint scheme is, admittedly, a little bit different to what immediately comes to my mind when I think British tanks, and I'm not even sure if the anti-air Crusaders were even painted like this at all ever, but as I've already said, I don't care, and I am considering the AA turrets secondary. The main thing is that it was fun to do. More fun than I think a solid green colour scheme would have been anyway. It probably means I'll end up with a British force with wildly inconsistent paint schemes, but I do have a lot of British tanks and doing them all exactly the same would be kind of tedious. I might be getting into waffling territory. Waffle territory. Anyway, I had fun painting this pair of tanks, and that's the important thing. These tanks probably wouldn't win any awards, but they do look pretty decent, and I would say that they're painted to a fairly high tabletop standard. I paint so that things look good at around arm's length, so maybe they're not perfect if you put them under a magnifying glass or something, and I'm sure there's some weirdos out there who would do that, but I don't think I would play games with them. What I'm trying to say is I've achieved my goals with these Crusaders, and they'll look nice crusading around the tabletop battlefield, absolutely crushing everything they come across. It is worth noting that I've got no idea how well these Crusaders perform in games like Flames of War. As always, if you're looking for some colour ideas and don't feel like going back through the video, there's a list of the colours I've used in the description below. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comments section below. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell here on YouTube, especially if you want to see videos about the new Comet Armoured Squadron box set. And if you want to see my videos a bit early before there's any ads, consider becoming a patron. You can find links to Patreon and all of my other things like Discord and social media in the description below. Take care of yourselves, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.